I don't know to what extent I should warn about spoilers, so I'm just going to be fair and say that this video discusses Kamen Rider 01, Gokaiger, the 1986 Transformers film, the live-action Transformers films, The Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, Thor Ragnarok, Captain Marvel, Merlin, and Pirates of the Caribbean. Most of these just mentioned in passing, but I wanted to be fair. No one with a poorly explained video! I don't want to get into a discussion about this versus that, which version is better. I'm not here to say fight scenes are terrible when you do this or other, you either do it this way or not at all. This is purely my opinion and observations that I've made. I also, while I have done a little bit of research, I haven't done enough to really confidently explain why certain things happen the way they do. And I don't want to come across as elitist either, I really don't. I'm just not good with tone. But I'm not looking down on anyone or anything. With that said, Toku has ruined fight scenes for me. I love fight scenes, that's why I love the Battle of the Five Armies and hate the Transformers films, the live action ones, not the cartoon one where Optimus Prime died and so did a piece of our childhoods. The Battle of the Five Armies has 45 minutes of fight, and the Transformers films are just explosion after confusing explosion with humans I don't care about running between them, and I can't see who's fighting and who's dying, and I just want to see the giant people punching each other. Is that too much to ask? There's a reason I fell in love with Ultraman so quickly. I have such a thing for giant people fighting and actually being able to see them fight. Recently, I've been on somewhat of a nostalgia kick. I've been going back and rewatching stuff from my childhood. I binge watched Merlin. I watched some of the MCU films I missed and rewatched some of my favourites, and honestly that's just it really. And I noticed that I'm just not enjoying the fights as much as I used to. And maybe it could have simply been that I've seen them so many times that eventually they're just not going to be interesting anymore. But I go back and rewatch the fight between Arc Horribee and Jin, and then the fight with Horribee and the Arc and Naruto later on, at least once a week, at least, and that is yet to get stale. I routinely go back to Marvelous and Basco's final fight because I adore it so much, and it's interesting and engaging every time. So what's the problem? Why is my attention just switching off whenever people fight now? I had a chat with a friend about this and we think we figured it out, or there are two specific things we figured out. Thor Ragnarok, easily my favourite Marvel film, easily, has this big epic fight at the beginning between these things. It's just Thor and Surtur talking at first, but then he's suddenly fighting these human-sized people and they just kind of run at him from nowhere. Don't get me wrong, it looks cool. There's this one shot of his hammer just smashing through people. It is a fun fight to watch, but because they just appear out of nowhere, you don't see them beforehand. I have no concept of how many of these things there are, so I have no clue if he's almost run through them all or if he's barely scratched the surface. I've watched videos of other people talking about fight scenes for research, and I think an easy fight scene to compare basically every other grand scale fight scene to is the Siege of Helm's Deep. You are introduced to the location beforehand, we've seen the defences, we know about the drainage gate being a weakness that the other side know about, we watch the Uruk-hai advancing, so you have a rough idea of how many people there are on both sides. You have a good understanding of the scale of this thing. I'm not going to try and argue that the average Sentai fight is anywhere near as grand as Helm's Deep. That was an exceptionally spectacular fight. But while every Sentai series has their group of cannon fodder, Gokaiger has the Gormin, Deku Ranger has the Mechanoids, Car Ranger has the combatant Wumpers. And I'm not trying to make this out to be any more profound than it is. These scenes are really usually, for the most part, primarily there to say, hey, look how cool this year's Sentai are. It's to show off their new skills and powers, but what these scenes do is they show you the group of foot soldiers they're about to fight before they fight. So you know how many there are and where they're coming from, so you know how far along the fight they are. There are plenty of instances where suddenly being ambushed obviously works. I'm not saying you have to show the army fully every single time. If you're in a place where you know you have to be quiet, but then say a skeleton head falls down a well and makes an almighty racket, and then the rest of the skeleton follows, and you've now alerted anyone that might be in the area to your presence, things like that work perfectly because the threat is always there. You know that the characters could get attacked at any minute, and the fact that they're being quiet and sneaky and not going in guns or wizard staffs blazing shows that they're not confident they could overpower the threat easily. You still have a feeling of the scale of this now impending fight, even though you haven't seen it, because the threat has still been implied. If you see just how many people there are, and your heroes are getting tired and struggling after just a few, you're tense, because if they're struggling at this point, there's no way they're going to get through this amount of people. If they're sneaking somewhere, you know it's because it's too dangerous to fight the people head on, so it's tense. Especially when they show you the building, or the ship, or the caves, or whatever area they're sneaking into, because even though that's not showing you the people, you know there are people inside this area somewhere, and if it's a big area, there's probably a lot of people in it. I just personally don't find fights all that interesting and engaging if I don't know the scale of what or who they're fighting. I'm not saying there can't be surprises in fight scenes. You think you're at the end when suddenly there's an even bigger threat. I mean, it's also not fun if you know who's going to win. I love a good twist in a fight scene, but I just prefer when these certain aspects are established beforehand. Captain Marvel was one of the MCU films I watched recently for the first time, and it was good and all, but during what was supposed to be an epic fight where she's finally utilising the full extent of her powers, I kind of just kept checking my phone. I just wasn't engaged because the entire fight was just she blasts this person, then she blasts this person, and then she does something with her bridge. I was much more interested in what Fury and Goose were up to, because I could actually see them perfectly well. There were no Liam Neeson-like jumping over fence cuts of Goose eating people. It was just that one angle of the cat sprouting tentacles from its mouth and eating people like a good cat. Merlin, I bloody love Merlin. But I watched a scene recently of Lancelot training with Arthur, and I could barely even see their hands half the time. It's a sword fight. I want to see where the swords are at. I just find it hard to engage in a fight scene where the camera is all over the place and it cuts after every strike. If it's not a fluid sequence, it's hard to really know what's going on. Jackie Chan talked about this actually, and he said that when a camera angle is constantly moving about the place, it means the actors don't know how to fight and the audience are just getting dizzy. Whereas when he fights, it's like, here's the camera, it's going to stay here and it's going to watch the fight so you can actually see what's going on. I'm going to link this video somewhere because it's amazing actually hearing Jackie Chan himself talk about this. Is it weird to get emotional hearing Jackie Chan talk about fight scenes? I have a hard time pinpointing specific things from an average fight after the fact because I don't know what I've just watched. Meanwhile, Toku fight scenes show you what's happening. To try and pinpoint one example of fights just being too hard to see, I'm going to go through a few fight scenes from shows that I do genuinely like. They're all going to be a minute of a fight between two people, and they're going to be grounded fights, nothing extravagant, no flying in the air, or off a train, or climbing a fence. It's just two people fighting, and we're going to count how many cuts each minute-long fight has. The first fight I have is between Merlin and Arthur. It's in the first episode, I think, so of course the actors are going to be inexperienced at this point, I do understand that, but regardless, this is a fight between Arthur and Merlin, 1 minute, and it's really more Arthur attacking Merlin and Merlin defending himself than an actual fair fight. But it's an important scene. It doesn't just exist to look cool, it establishes the two characters early on. Arthur is arrogant and big-headed, and Merlin has to protect this arsehole, but he can't freely use his magic since it's banned from Camelot and punishable by death. And Merlin is great, because he's this really awkward, bumbling guy who can't fight back, so of course he doesn't use magic. It's an important scene, and the bit at the end where Arthur's last 3 strikes match the music is brilliant, but count with me. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, 38, 39. 40, 41, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 51, 51 in a minute. 51 cuts in a minute between two people, doing nothing extravagant. 51! I think, because one of those bits was very muddy, and I might have miscounted, but roughly 51. This absolutely isn't an exact science, because I actually cut that scene short. That was less than a minute, and I don't want to do it again. And the third fight is actually longer than that, but this isn't a proper investigation and the point still stands. I'll get to that later. And honestly, the fact that I lost count and cut it short because the cuts just got too overwhelming also just proves my point. The second fight is the first fight between Jack and Will in Pirates of the Caribbean, and I had to slow it down for that very reason. Ready? Oh, hopefully I can do better this time. Ready? Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. 66. I got 66. I think, because even slowed down, that was too hard. They were too fast. 66 cuts, I think. The third scene is when the Ark is making Horribee fight Jin, his son, in that glorious episode where he finally breaks free, no thanks to any bugger else. Count with me. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. So, like I said, I messed up a little bit, but even so, 51 cuts in a roughly 50-odd second Merlin fight, 66-ish cuts in a minute-long Pirates fight that I couldn't even keep track of, and then 18 cuts in a longer than 1 minute fight in a series being filmed during a pandemic with a whole new bunch of new restrictions and a skeleton crew, a situation where you would forgive them editing whatever they had in whatever way they had to make it look coherent, in a situation where the actors would not have had enough time to thoroughly go over choreography. But I do know that Takara Seiji taught cinematography for this, and it shows. They're able to keep it going so nicely, to the point that I was able to analyse that fight scene because wow, did Horribee look like he wasn't even moving himself, the Ark was moving him. Toku shows do not use cuts in fights to hide the fact that the actors can't do it, because the actors can, because they're taught how to. Kamen Rider is a franchise that had that scene in the build film where the camera is following the fight overhead and then all of a sudden it goes through the window and down the stairs. Most fight scenes I'm used to use cuts and shaky cameras and weird angles to obscure the fact that it's not a real fight. But Toku seems to use the camera angles and cuts and limited movement to show off the very real choreography happening in front of you. It doesn't shy away because the actor can't actually do that. It follows the movement so you can see the actor doing that. I feel like the more people there are, the more cuts there are going to be, right? In Gokaiger, there's a scene in episode 39 where some are over here fighting Basco and some are over here fighting Sally. Do you know how many cuts are in a scene like that? A scene with wire work and fire and explosions amongst 8 people. It's bound to have more cuts in it than a grounded fight scene between 2, right? 32 cuts in a fight, longer than a minute, because I forgot to stop, in 2 separate areas with 8 people. In conclusion, I'm sure you could argue that having more cuts than there are seconds in a fight scene, and shaky cameras as if they're filming in an earthquake, or a low-budget BBC space drama studio trying to give the impression the ship is falling apart while you try to get your actors to sway in unison, it's supposed to make the fight scene feel more synergetic. I personally just find it incredibly difficult to follow. After doing some base level googling, it seems most people put it down to obscuring the fact that the actors don't actually know how to fight. I'm sure there are multiple reasons for it, but the truth is I just switch off mentally during the average fight scene, or I forget about it almost immediately. I rarely walk out of a cinema going, oh my god, that fight scene was amazing, did you see how this happened and then that happened? But with Toku, I genuinely remember them a lot more, because I can see what's happening, I can follow it, and to me, that makes the whole scene just that much more impactful. And the truth is, I never used to care about multiple cuts and shaky cameras until I got into Toku, and it showed me what I've been missing all this time.